Okay, we're recording now. So, and I will share with you what we did before. Okay, so DRA essentially is it's a worldwide no or an internationally accepted method to determine risks associated with hazards no. So in our case, when we say DRA, it means disease risk assessment or analysis. Wait lang ah. This is really important. Ayun. So which means that um it's not something that is done by just one person. No? It usually is a workshop and many stakeholders are invited to contribute to the analysis. No? So I'll show you an example of something we did last year. Ayan. Tanggalin natin to. Hide sidebar and ganun yun. Ayan. So, I'm gonna hide sidebar. So, this DRA was, it was organized as a response to something that happened in January of 2020. You know? So, in January of 2020, a colleague of mine asked for assistance in decision making because there was a group of wild pigs in a private forest reserve that died in die off of the population of these wild pigs. And the provincial the city vets came in and tested these pigs. Turned out that it was ASF. There were no reports of die-offs involving ASF before January 2020. So we had to make a quick decision and we used the protocol of the BAI. And unfortunately, the protocol of the BAI required that all the pigs be sacrificed, no? Be euthanized. So when you think about it, hindi kasi siya like euthanasia for or ang tawag doon yung mass destruction o mass culling is not actually practical and applicable in wild pigs, no? Because it will result to further disease spread, no? As you hunt them, they will know that they are being hunted and they will move to other territories. So it was because of this that a disease risk analysis was conceptualized for Philippine wild pigs, no? To improve ASF management. No? So we did this starting 2020, but we were only able to implement it on August 2021. Medyo mahabang process because we needed to contact all the relevant bodies, no, for this. We did not have funding for it, and we had to ask the help of the Wild Pig Specialist Group, of which I'm a member. Okay, so I'm showing you, this is the workbook that we have. So each one had to have a copy of this workbook, and in that, wait lang, nahihilo ba? Sorry kung nahihilo kayo. I gave a copy to you in the classroom. So there's a link to this document in the classroom explaining why we needed the DRA, no? Why we need the disease risk assessment or analysis. No? Members of the Wild Pig Specialist Group particularly were very alarmed at the die-off happening, no? Because there are 4 known species of wild pigs in the Philippines. The least in danger, kasi vulnerable, ano yun, vulnerable ang status niya is the Sus philippensis. Unfortunately, because of ASF, the die-offs that happened occurred in this population. So the prediction of the wild pig specialist group is that we might lose Sus philippensis much faster than the rest of the Sus species we have in the Philippines, including critically endangered species. No? Baka maunahan pa ng Sus philippensis ma-extinct kesa sa critically endangered species. No? So, ayan. The process of a DRA revolves around communication. No? So, first of all, we need to describe the problem. Saan na yun? So, first, a problem is described. And this is what the team did to describe, for instance, what the problem was, how do we see it progressing, where it is, etc. And then we asked them, this is presented to the participants, which are composed of stakeholders, no, that are identified that might affect or influence the problem. No? So the stakeholders we identified for this specific DRA are, of course, the people from the BAI, people from the BMB, or so Bureau of Animal Industry, then Biodiversity Management Bureau, people on the ground like conservation workers, representatives of backyard farmers, representatives of IPs, representatives of the swine industry, the big companies, no? Very vocal sila actually during this workshop. They felt that like they were the black sheep in the group. And then local implementers such as the provincial vets, no, and researchers, no, representatives from the academe and things, and people who actually work on the ground, no. Okay, so we presented the description to them, and then they identified what hazards there might be, no. But in our case, we already identified this hazard, which is ASF. In other DRAs, there will be like multiple hazards, no? For instance, one example I put in the classroom is the koala DRA, and they've identified many disease hazards there, no? So for us, because it's targeted towards ASF in wild pigs in the Philippines, we identify the hazard for them, and this is ASF. So showing the participants what the problem is, because we're scared, no, that these animals might go extinct in the near future because of the hazard ASF, we showed them, we asked them to assess the risk that ASF might have on our wild pig population. So we gave them scenarios because based on the scenarios that are present in the Philippines. So those scenarios are, we have islands in the Philippines that have ASF. These are the islands of Luzon. Essentially the spine of the Philippines, if you look at the Philippines, it looks like a fetus, no? So the spine of the Philippines that is covered by Daang Maharlika, the national highway spanning from North Luzon to Mindanao, no? So all of those areas, they are ASF positive, no? And because they are ASF positive, the chances of wild pigs getting ASF in these areas are high. But if you superimpose the habitat of Sus philippensis on these areas with ASF, they totally overlap. So only habitats of Sus philippensis have ASF. So that's one, excuse me. May hika pa rin ako. So that's one scenario. Islands with ASF. The other scenario that we presented are islands without ASF, at, such as Mindoro and Negros and Palawan. And these three islands, they hold unique pig species to those islands, no? So there's the Sus ahenobarbus in Palawan, Sus sebifrons in Negros and Panay, and Sus oliverae in Mindoro, no? All of these three, they are more in danger of being extinct, no? So they are either endangered or critically endangered. So but because there is no ASF in the island, there should be a different approach in risk assessment. So having these two scenarios presented to the stakeholders, they group themselves and identify the possible risks to the population. After risk assessment, we ask them, how do we manage the risk? After identifying perhaps the risk of spreading ASF into Negros via, like boats, then we ask them to think about, how do we manage the risk? And they thought about this. Because it was a 2-day workshop, we were not able to go to risk communication. So this is where we'll come in your activity. We need to identify then what patterns. No, actually, we went to the risk communication, but I'll show you the result of the the risk communication pathways, that we currently have in the Philippines regarding ASF. I'll stop sharing and then I'll show you kasi nakakalito yung, baka mahilo kayo. So in the end, we identified all of that and we had to stop there, because we didn't have enough time to finish the whole workshop. So essentially what we did with them is to introduce the DRA process to these stakeholders so that they might be able to understand how to go about managing any disease risk that we might have. The people who need to be on top of things with, let's say, ASF and AI, they didn't do the DRA beforehand. That's why, and it's not something that is second nature to us as a country to do DRAs. It's very obvious in the way we manage hazards. The Philippines is very much almost always reactive in managing hazards or in managing disease, managing dangers, rather than being proactive with it. So it kakalungkot, but that's the reality. So na yun. There. Kaloka, di ba? Ayun. So having said that, when we looked at the communication lines, we saw that they are very much parallel, and the people who contributed to identification of the communication lines were from agencies such as the DA and the DNR. So what we found out is that their lines were parallel, meaning they don't converge. So if someone reports that there's a die-off of wild pigs to the DENR or to the BAI would say, that's not our turf because they're wild pigs, you should report to DNR. If for instance, someone reports that there's a sick wild pig to DNR, the DNR will say that's a health issue, disease issue, go to BAI. So people down the line get a little bit confused as to the reporting process and to reporting is also delayed, for instance. So the case that I told you about earlier, about the die-off happening in a private protected area, that forest park, happened in January. It wasn't until October that I was able to confirm that the report reached the BAI. So in January, it should have been already in the WAHIS or the information system of OIE, but it isn't because the channels of communication had some holes. No? So it's so this session, my assignment for the class or for each of the groups would be for you to pretend that you are stakeholders in this, no, in the management of ASF in wild pigs. So for your activity, each member of the group will either will mag-ano tayo, let's pretend, no, let's role play, kumbaga, no. So each member of the group will either be a smallhold pig farmer, so you choose which one you are, a corporate swine manager, a conservation worker, an indigenous people's representative, a hunter, or a cook, depending on the number of people in the group. Basta one person, each group, one person will take on the role of one of these people. No? And the last one is cook. Like you cook for a living. No? So consumer, kumbaga. So using the risk communications portion of the workbook, you need to identify which critical communication points are important to stress so that you can communicate the risk, control, prevention of ASF to communities. And then we need to use the two scenarios in places without ASF and those with ASF. No? And then the output will be two diagrams to show these communication pathways applied to each of these two scenarios. So, ang deadline natin isn't until November 7 anyway. So, you can include this activity as a review for you for your exam on November 7. I have in the classroom, I have an example of a finished DRA. And then there's also the workbook for you of the ASF DRA. So yun. Any questions? Kahit i-message nyo kung nahihiya kayo. Wala. Okay. I'll end the recording.